It was 2 days before the Passover. And the scribes and the Pharisees were looking for a way to kill him. But Jesus, however, was in the home of Simon the leper. And they were relaxing at the table, enjoying a meal, when suddenly this woman comes in, carrying an alabaster jar of extremely expensive ointment. She breaks it and pours it over his head. Well, some of those present were grumbling, and they're saying, "What a waste of precious perfume. It could have been sold for a year's wage." And they accosted her. And Jesus said to them, "Leave her alone." Why? Why are you giving her so much trouble? She has done a beautiful thing for me. You will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. Listen. I tell you that wherever the gospel is preached throughout all of the world, what this woman has done will be told in memory of her. And then, that is when Judas went to the chief priests and the scribes in order to hand Jesus over. Of course, they were delighted, and they offered him and they promised him money. And it was from that moment on that Judas began looking for a way to betray Jesus.
On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, Jesus' disciples came to him and asked him, "Where do you want us to go to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?" So he sent two of them, saying, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jug of water will meet you. Follow him, and whatever house he enters, say to the owner of that house, 'The teacher says, where's my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' He'll show you a large room upstairs, furnished and ready." So they went into the city, and they found everything just as he had said, and they prepared the Passover meal. When it was evening, Jesus came with his disciples. And when they'd taken their places and were eating, Jesus said to them, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me, one who's eating with me." They were all really upset and began saying to him one after another, "Surely not I, surely not I." Jesus said to them, "It's one of the 12, one who's dipping bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written about him. But woe to that one by whom he is betrayed. It would have been better for that one if he'd never been born." While they were eating, he took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, and he gave it to them, saying, "Take, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is the covenant of my blood, which is shed for many. Truly I tell you, I'll not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God."
And then after they sung the hymn, they went up to the Mount of Olives. And while they were there, Jesus said to his disciples, you will all become my deserters. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter said to him, come on, Lord, even though all will become your deserters, I will not. And Jesus looked at Peter and said, truly I tell you, this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said to him, oh, Lord, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all of them said the same.
It was under the cover of night when they came to this place, their favorite place called the Garden of Gethsemane. He told all of his disciples just to stay here while I go and pray. And he took Peter and James and John. And as he was going, he was just shuddering at the horror of it. And he said, my soul is so filled with grief I could die. Stay here, please stay here and watch. And then he went over a little bit further and he fell down on the ground and he was somehow hoping and praying that this cup would be taken away from him. And he said, Abba God, he said, my Abba Father, I know that all things are possible with you. Just take this cup away from me, he said. And then he said, but not my will, but your will be done. And he came back. And he found them sleeping. And he said, Simon, you couldn't stay awake for even just 1 hour? Simon, pray that you will not fall into the power of temptation. And he said that the spirit is strong, but the will is so fickle. And he went back and he prayed the same thing. And when he came back, he found the disciples, their eyes were so heavy. They didn't know what to say. He came back a 3rd time and he said, get up, rise up. Look, my betrayer is coming, he said. He said, for the hour has struck on the Son of Man to be handed over into the power of the godless. And who was there? It was Judas, one of the inner 12. He came with a band of men who were armed with clubs and sticks. And he had made a signal with them. He said to them, the one that I kiss, grab hold of him and lead him away. So immediately Judas went to Jesus and he said to him, Rabboni, And he kissed him. And so they grabbed Jesus. And then somebody whacked off the high priest's ear. And Jesus said, "Wait a minute." He said, "Am I a terrorist that you come up against me with clubs and sticks? Listen, I was with you every day in the temple, teaching in the temple courts. Why not then?" But the script must be played out, doesn't it? And as soon as he said that, all of his disciples, all of them just bolted, took off. But here's something. There was a young man. He was just wearing a linen cloth. And when they grabbed him, he ran away stark naked. But he left this linen cloth behind. Curious. So the armed men took Jesus to the high priest's palace. And the whole Sanhedrin had gathered together. The chief priests and the scribes, and of course the elders were there too. They all had taken their seats. Peter, however, had been following at a distance. And you know something? He came right into the temple, right into the high priest's courtyard. And he sat there among the temple police, warming himself by the light of the fire. The whole Sanhedrin had gathered together, and they were looking for evidence against Jesus because they were bound and determined to get rid of him. Oh yes, there were all kinds of different witnesses that stood up, giving false testimony against Jesus. But you know something? Nothing. None of their testimony matched up. There were a few that stood up and said, "Oh, we heard him say that I will destroy this temple built with human hands, and in 3 days I shall raise up this temple not built with human hands." But you know something? Even this testimony did not match up. And that's when the high priest took his position in the center. And he said to Jesus, "No answer? Do you not hear all of these accusations against you?" Jesus did not open his mouth. And then the high priest said, You, the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus then said, "Am I? You will see with your own eyes. You will see the Son of Man hoisted up and enthroned at the right hand of God, coming in clouds of power." Oh, the high priest tore his garments. And he said, "What more witnesses do we need?" he said. "You've heard the blasphemy. Well," he said to the whole Sanhedrin, "what do you all think?" And all of them together condemned him, said he was a man worthy of death. And that's when they started spitting at him over and over again. Then they blindfolded him and they punched him. And they said, "Come on, prophesy." Punched him again. And then they handed him over to the temple police, who also took the boots to him. Of course, meanwhile, Peter was down below in the courtyard, warming his hands.
And while Peter was below in the courtyard, a servant girl of the high priest came by. She noticed Peter warming himself by the fire, and she stared at him. And she said, "You also were with that man, Jesus of Nazareth." But Peter denied it. He said, "I do not know or understand what you are talking about." And he went out into the forecourt, and the cock crowed. Okay. And then upon seeing him, the servant girls said to the bystanders, "He's one of them. He knows Jesus of Nazareth. This man is one of them." But again, Peter denied it. Well, after a while, the bystanders kept on. And they said to Peter, "Come on. You were with Jesus of Nazareth. Surely you're one of them, for you are a Galilean." And Peter began to curse. And he swore an oath. "I do not know this man you are talking about." And at that moment, the cock crowed for the second time. Oh. And then Peter remembered. He remembered what Jesus had said to him. That before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And then Peter broke down and beating his breast. He wept.
As the sun came over the horizon, this was the first watch of the day. The entire Sanhedrin gathered together again for a consultation where they came to a decision. Jesus had already been bound, and they took him away, and they brought him to Pilate. And when Pilate saw him, he said, You are the king of the Jews?" And then Jesus opened his mouth and he said, Am I You're the one speaking." Right away, the chief priests jumped in there and started casting all kinds of accusations at him. And so Pilate addressed the crowds again and said, yeah. No. Pilate said, "You?" And Jesus remained silent. And Pilate was a little bit baffled at that. Now, Pilate had this Passover. At the Passover, he had this little ceremony they had with the Jewish people. That at every Passover, they would release a prisoner. And he had in his incarceration a prisoner by the name of Barabbas, a terrorist. Barabbas means the Father's son. And the crowds started demanding Pilate to do for them as he had always done for them. And then Pilate said, "Do you want me to release to you?" He said, "Do you really want me to release to you the king? The one that you call King of the Jews?" And right away the chief priests again jumped in and tried to convince the crowds for Pilate to release Barabbas instead. And so then Pilate addressed the crowds again and said, "Well then, what do you want me to do with the one you call King of the Jews?" And the crowds started screaming and just saying, "Crucify him!" And Pilate saying, "Why? What has he done?" And the crowds just went berserk saying, "Crucify him," even louder. So Pilate handed Barabbas over to them, the terrorist. But Jesus, he had publicly flogged. And after that, he handed him over to the Roman security forces to be hoisted up on a cross. And they took him. And they brought him to a place called the barracks, the Praetorium. They took off his clothes. And they called the whole barracks together. And they robed him in purple. And then they wove together a crown, a weave of thorns. And they crowned him. And they began saying, "Hail, King of the Jews! Hail, King of the Jews!" And they hit him on the head with a stick. And then they began spitting at him. And finally, they bowed down and paid him homage. And then they led him out into the streets on the parade to be hoisted up on a cross. And as he was going, there was a certain Simon who was coming in from the fields. A certain Simon of Cyrene, who was the father of Alexander and Rufus. And they forced Simon to pick up the cross and to follow Jesus. And they got to the place. Place called Golgotha. And it was here that they offered him a drug, wine mixed with myrrh. But you know, he refused it. And after they had hoisted him up on the cross, the security guard, the Roman soldiers began throwing dice to divide up his clothing. It was 9 o'clock, which is the third watch of the day, where they crucified him, where they hoisted him up and enthroned him on a stake. And then above him there was a placard, and inscribed on the placard said, "King of Judea." And then they hoisted up two revolutionary bandits, one on his right hand and the other on his left hand. And the pedestrians who were walking by, when they saw this, people walking by started making faces at him and saying, were you really going to destroy the temple and in 3 days rebuild it? Oh, let's see you come now down from the cross. The same thing with the Judean elite. The priests and the scribes, the elders were also there. And they were snickering among one another and saying, he saved others. He can't save himself. Let's see, they said. Let us see if he comes down from the cross. Then we'll believe, they said. Then we will see and believe. And you know, even those who were at his right hand and his left hand were poking fun at him. And then at noon, the 6th watch of the day, a great darkness poured out over the whole land. It was a darkness you could feel for 3 hours until 3 o'clock, which is the 9th watch of the day. And right at 3 o'clock, he cried out in a loud voice. He shouted and he said, "Eloi, Eloi, Saba sabachthani." And you know, when you translate, that means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Somebody said, "See? He's crying for Elijah." So somebody else ran and brought a sponge soaked with myrrh and wine, put it on a reed and held up to him and said, "Leave him alone. See, let's see if Elijah comes and takes him down from the cross." But Jesus again cried out in this loud shout and breathed his final breath. And then there was a ripping sound. The curtain in the temple was ripped in two from top to bottom. Yes, ripped right in half. And the centurion, the soldier who was watching all these things, when he watched how Jesus breathed his final breath, he said, he said, "So, this man really was the Son of God." Now you have to understand that this was a day called the Day of Preparation. All these things took place on the Day of Preparation, a day of purging. And so a wealthy landowner, an elite member of the Sanhedrin, a man by the name of Joseph of Arimathea, screwed up his courage and went before Pilate to ask for Jesus' corpse. And again, Pilate was just baffled that Jesus had died so quickly. And so he summoned his centurion, who was right there with him, and confirmed that he had died, and then handed the body over to this man. So this member of the council went out and bought some linen. And he dismounted the body, and he quickly rolled it up in some linen. And he disposed of the body in a large cave that had been hewn out of rock. And then he rolled this huge boulder over it and blocked the entrance. But two women, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Josie, they saw all of these things. And they took careful note of where they had disposed of the body.